Hi, this is Dustine from Two Lucky Cats. I'd like to talk to you about what you need to consider when you're going to purchase materials to do our paper mache projects. The first type of materials I want to talk to you about is the materials that you use for building the structure that you'll layer the paper on. In the research that I've done on paper mache, the most common material that's been used to create the structure is cardboard. The good thing about cardboard is you can get it for free. It comes in different weights and different thicknesses. So sometimes you can just use one piece, or if you only have thin pieces of cardboard, you can always glue it together to make a stronger surface. The downside of cardboard is that it's porous and it can absorb moisture. And of course you're going to be using a glue mixture to apply the paper, so that moisture can be absorbed by the cardboard, which can cause warping. And as we do some of the projects, if that's going to be a problem, I'll give you some tips on how to minimize the warping with cardboard. Now, the other material that you can use is a material I discovered when I started to work with bookmaking, and that is bookboard. The good thing about bookboard is it's not as porous as cardboard, so there's less chance of your project warping. The downside, of course, is you have to pay for it. And it's not outrageously expensive. There are some websites that sell an economy bookboard that works just fine. In the instruction sheet for this video, I have included some online sources where you can find these materials if you can't find them locally. The next type of material I'd like to talk to you about is glue. And of course you're going to use glue to tape the different pieces together to create a structure, or you're going to use a mixture of the glue to layer the paper over the cardboard structure. The most common type of glue used is something like Elmer's glue, a white PVA glue that you can find almost anywhere. It's relatively inexpensive, but the downside is that when you're using it to glue the different pieces together, it's not very tacky, so the pieces have a tendency to shift. So in order to keep them in place till the glue dries, you have to use masking tape. And of course you don't need to remove the masking tape after the structure's dried. You can just paper over it. You can also use it, it's good to use it to mix 3 parts glue to 1 part water as a glue to layer the paper over the structure. The other type of glue that you can use that I prefer is also a PVA glue, and it's a bookbinding PVA. The reason I prefer this particular type of glue is because it's much tackier than the Elmer's glue. And you have the ability to move the pieces around if you didn't position it exactly where you wanted to the first time. But once you have everything in position, the pieces will stay where they're supposed to, and they're not shifting all over the place. The downside is it's a little bit more expensive, and you were probably going to have to find it somewhere where they sell book making supplies. The next material I wanted to talk to you about is a type of paper you can use to cover the structure of your project. If you look in most paper mache books, likely the paper that they'll be using is newspaper. I don't like to use newspaper myself because it has ink on it, and you can get ink all over your hands and all over your clothes. Plus, you have to paint it with a primer like latex paint. So the ink and the pictures on the newsprint doesn't show through your final project. So what I like to use is what is called newsprint, and it's just the paper that they print the newspapers on, but of course it doesn't have anything on it. It's plain. You can buy it in tablet form, and it's relatively inexpensive, and you can probably find it in any arts and crafts store. Sometimes even in some places like the drugstore, they'll have tablets of newsprint. The other material that I like to use is something that you get for free because it's used in a packing material, or it's also used if you go to the store and you purchase something breakable like glass or dishes, and they'll wrap the things up in that paper so you don't break it. It's about the same color as the newsprint, it has a slight sheen to it, and I just really like it's easy to mold it around the project that you're making. So if you get any of that, save it, and you can use it in your next paper mache project. The final material I'd like to talk with you about is the paper that you're going to be using for the final layer of paper on your project. When I eliminated painting the primer, because I didn't have to cover over the print on the newsprint, I thought, why just not eliminate paint altogether and use some type of colored paper as the final layer of paper. And that layer of paper acts as part of the construction, but also part of the decoration. Now, one type of paper that I use for the background is something that is fairly inexpensive and it's easy to find, and that is regular tissue paper. And this is pretty easy to work with as long as you just tweak the technique that I've covered in the video on tips and techniques on working with paper mache. And if you do those things, then you're going to have a good result with tissue paper. The other type of paper that I use sometimes, it's fairly inexpensive, and this is paper that I use to cut the designs that I'm putting on the final layer of paper, the decorative design. This is construction paper, and construction paper comes in different weights. This particular paper is pretty thin, so you might be able to use that also for the background. I haven't tried it, but you might want to try and see if you can use a thinner weight of construction paper. You can use it plain with the different colors. And another thing that I did, if you wanted to have a pattern on it, you can just create your own pattern and use something like a permanent marker or crayons that's not going to smear if you when you paint over it with the glue mixture. So you can use your imagination, do polka dots or stripes or spirals or flowers or whatever, stars. There's all kinds of different ways that you can decorate the paper. And then, like I say, this is good to use in the design element. The other type of paper that I use in my projects is different types of handmade paper. And one of my favorites is mulberry paper because it comes in different textures and all kinds of colors. You can get it in smooth, you can get it in a rough type of paper, and you can also get it in a tissue weight paper. And this is stronger than the regular tissue paper because it has fibers in it. And that's also an element of the design because you can see the fibers in the paper. It's also stronger because of the fiber. And this is paper that I use to create the background. And pretty much always I just use a plain color paper to create the background. Now, when I'm going to use paper for the design elements that I'm going to be placing on the surface, the paper that you use to cover your structure with has to be flexible enough when you put the glue mixture on it to go over the different curves and sides of the structure. So you can't use something that's like cardstock that's thicker. But if you're going to create the design, you can use paper that's a little bit thicker, but you still want it to be flexible because chances are you're going to be applying your design to a flat surface, so you can stick it on even if it's a little stiffer. For the design, you can use different types of mulberry paper. I also like to use something called pineapple paper that you can use both for covering your background and for the design. You can use different paper with different prints. All kinds of paper will work well for creating the design and gluing those elements on your structure. So I haven't had the opportunity to work with every type of paper out there. If you want to experiment with some paper you have, like wrapping paper, just get a piece of cardboard and use the technique to glue it on, or see if it'll mold around the surface of your object and see how it works out. Before we go, I just wanted to share some examples with you so you can understand what kind of results you'll get from different types of paper. The first example I'd like to show you is a happy cat face clock. And the base is made from cardboard. the background is tissue paper, and then I use construction paper that I decorated with permanent marker. So as you can see, you can get a good result, and you don't have to go out and buy handmade paper. You can get a good result just from tissue paper and construction paper. Another example here, again, is a Happy Cat face clock. And in this case, I used handmade mulberry paper for the background, and I used different decorated paper to make the different design elements of the cat's face. And the third Happy Cat face clock I wanted to show you is just different types of solid color mulberry paper that I used both for the background and then to create the cat's face. Another example is this doll bed. I made the doll bed and I used bookboard for the structure, and then I used a textured mulberry for the background, and then for the decoration on the front of the bed I just used the smooth mulberry paper. And then finally I'd like to show you this shelf. Now the structure of the shelf was made with cardboard, and I glued two pieces together for the different parts of the shelf. And then on the maroon color is made from pineapple paper. And as you can see, you can barely see the seams of the different pieces of paper. And then the other paper that I used for the yellow is a tissue mulberry, and also it gives an interesting texture to the surface of your design. I hope you go out and buy some material and come back and do a paper mache project with us. Come back often, because we have a lot of tips and projects to share with you here at twoluckycats.com.